Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the start of the 2022 Black Landscapes Matters Speaker Series. My name is Robin Wright Pierce, and I am so excited to be with you all this evening and to kick off this really important initiative of the Black Environmental Leaders Association. This is an initiative that started last year, and we're hoping this year to take it to the next level. It's an initiative where we engage in statewide conversation, bringing in activists from across the state to have important conversations about the connection between our built and natural environment and racial justice. We'll be traveling virtually across the state of Ohio today, starting with Cleveland, Ohio. While I'm from Cincinnati, I am happy to be sharing space with my folks from Northeast Ohio. We have some really amazing panelists here today. We're going to be talking about issues of environmental and landscape challenges as it relates to the Black community. We know that environmental justice is a racial justice issue, and our goal with this initiative is to broaden the conversation and to help really to connect those dots between the injustices that we encounter in our communities as it relates to the environment and the ways that our environment has been constructed with a disregard for us oftentimes, in the ways that we have learned to be in relationship to our environment. Our hope is to broaden that conversation and to show the ways that systemic disinvestment and intentional disregard for our health and well-being as Black folks and often the fact that we're left out of the conversations about what to do in our environment, how we can relate to the natural environment and the built environment around us. We're left out of those conversations. And so today with this initiative, we're hoping to enter that conversation and to elevate these issues and to show why environmental justice is a racial justice issue. And so I am super excited for today's conversation. We're actually going to be focusing on Cleveland, Ohio, and in particular, exploring how instances of racialized violence, right? We talk about racialized violence in our community all the time. We've been in this conversation for generations, and most recently as it relates to things like police brutality, right? As it relates to things connected to the ways that the state is imposing harm on Black bodies. We talk about racialized violence all the time, and today we want to dive into that conversation and to explore how instances of racialized violence actually impact how Black folks connect to the world around us, right? How does that impact our identification with space and place in those instances? And so I'm really excited about this conversation and also exploring how we can begin to heal from those traumas so that we can move forward and we can reclaim our environments as spaces that belong to us, that we can to be around. We can memorialize those spaces and understand that those spaces too belong to us. And so I'm excited to kick off this series. This is the first of 6, so please do join us each month. The third Thursday of the month at 6 o'clock, we're going to be going live in these conversations. And again, today I'm excited because we have some amazing panelists that I'm going to introduce here in just a second. But before I do, I actually want to turn it over to David Wilson, who in addition to being one of our panelists today, he's the co-director of the Black Environmental Leaders Association, here to share more with you all about who BEL is and why BEL is this.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Robin. It is an absolute pleasure and honor to be sharing the space with you, Jennifer, Daniel, to kick off the Black Landscapes Matter conversation for this year. As Robin mentioned, my name is David Wilson. I am the co-director along with Samia Bray and in legacy of Jacqueline Gillen for the Black Environmental Leaders Association, and short for BEL. And so BEL stands as stewards of the natural and built environment through collaboration and partnership to raise awareness and advocate for environmental and economic justice. And we work collectively to provide a forum for community environmental education, which can serve as a basis of a deeper understanding and commitment to land, water, air, transportation, and energy issues that impact our economic bottom line through the lens of health, diversity, inclusion and equity. So I know that's kind of a mouthful, but this topic of environmental justice is really kind of at the root of where Bell started. And so we formed in 2017. We incorporated in 2020 and have been working across both the built and the natural environment through a distributive leadership model. So all of our members are leaders in their own right and represent Bell in their various positions of work and also through their lived experience. And that is a unique lens in which our members and our allies bring to this work. So very excited to have this conversation. Black Landscapes Matter started last May, and we had conversations across the state. We started in Cincinnati, Columbus. We went here to Cleveland to actually talk about this topic that we're going to be talking about today. Dayton, Youngstown, and we're planning a whole series in a host of cities to kind of that Black Landscapes Matter 2.0 this year, starting here in Cleveland, going to Sandusky, Akron, Lima, Steubenville, and beyond. So very excited to kickstart this conversation here with Jennifer and Daniel. And I'll hand the mic back to you, Robin.
Thank you, David. Without further ado, I'll introduce more formally Jennifer and Daniel, who we are excited to share this space with. So first up, Jennifer Lumpkin from Cleveland. Jennifer is the founder of Creative Community Builders, LLC and MyGrow Connect, which is a sustainable community development initiative in Cleveland. And she has done a host of organizing work, advocacy work. She's a strategist. She's the real deal, y'all, and it is truly a treat to be able to share some space with her. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Robin. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, we're glad you're here. And then we're also delighted to have joining us Daniel Calloway, who I just realized we went to Kent State University together. So shout out to the Golden Flashes. Daniel is a diversity and equity inclusion practitioner and also someone with 15 years of service from the Cuyahoga Valley National Park Service, which is a tremendous feat. Nowadays, people don't spend 15 years anywhere. So that shows this brother's commitment to being connected to nature and to being connected to the environment around him and helping to bring others into that space as well. So we are excited to be sharing space with you tonight, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and again, as I said earlier, David Wilson, the co-director of Bell, is also on this panel. And again, you've heard from David already, and so you see his brilliance already shining. So thank you all. So let's get started. Let's jump into this conversation. So I actually want to start with you, David, really to help give some context and lay the foundation of this conversation. So we know a big part of this conversation today is actually related to the Community Remembrance Project. And that's an initiative, for those who don't know, of the Equal Justice Institute. So think Brian Stevenson, right? And it's an important initiative that's really bringing, helping to memorialize spaces where racialized harm has happened across the nation. And that initiative, the Community Remembrance Project, is coming to Cleveland, coming to Ohio. And so I would love, David, for you to just give more input on what that initiative is and why Bell thought it was important to bring that here, and what you're hoping comes from having that initiative and project here in Cleveland.
Yes, absolutely. And so how Black Environmental Leaders Association was connected with this. We first found out about the project about a year ago when the Center for Community Solutions, which is based out of Columbus, informed us about a convening, a discussion that they were having around a 1911 incident that happened in Cleveland, a lynching of a Black man that was reported as part of the EJI research that was done into the campaign of racial terror that happened after the Civil War, really, kind of taking a deep dive from 1877 to 1950 on what were those documented cases of racial violence in connection to lynching. And so there were 11 reported incidents that happened in Ohio. The Community for CCS, the Community for or Center for Community Solutions, they were involved in a couple of projects in Southern Ohio. Started convening the conversation in Cleveland, and quickly, found out that we need a local partner in this. This is a conversation that is a lot larger than just a physical marker. That there is obviously a lot of history and a lot of complicated history here in Cleveland, which I'm sure we'll get into in this discussion. But that Black environmental leaders seemed uniquely positioned to host this conversation moving forward. And so I did reference one of the outcomes of the EJI Remembrance Project is that marker, but also there is a component of community engagement and outreach that has to happen, which includes convening these types of discussions around it, identifying who some of those kind of community leaders are to host these discussions, and also that that once that marker is in the ground, the conversation doesn't end there, that it continues. And so, as an association that works directly in both the natural and built environment, we are here. We are dedicated to these issues and feel very strongly about continuing to uplift the stories that in the past have been either forgotten or intentionally erased.
That's awesome. That's so important, right? To be able to have the conversations about the things that have happened in the past. And so to that end, Daniel, I actually want to bring you into this conversation because there are some people who say, why are we looking back at the past? We need to just move forward. We don't need to spend all of our time and energy thinking about the things that happened in the past. And some even proclaim that that's why we're not making the progress we ought to be making around racial equity, that we're stuck in the past. And so what would you say to those people, and why do you think it's important for us to understand and to remember history in connection to our present day experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing that was always taught to me, and even going back to Kent State in the Pan-African Studies Department, history is here for us to understand, and it comes from the lens of those that are telling the stories. There are so many untruths and so many stories that have not been told in America's history. And when we think about the word history, it's his story or their story. Not all stories are being told right now. When I hear individuals say that history is in the past and we should keep it there, I say to them, if you don't understand your past, you don't know where you're going. To understand history and even take it even further into the work that I'm doing within the national park, we are the keepers or the stewards of so many different stories across this nation and these public lands and spaces in which so many people have come from, and even those indigenous individuals that land was stolen from. If we don't understand those stories and what happened, we're bound to go back into it. If we're looking at the landscape of slavery to modern day, those things have transformed, but if you can't understand of what happened and how those things happen, then when we move forward, we're left out of the story. We're left out of the picture and understanding how these things transpire, but then also how we can do things to be better. Even if you're looking at our education system, if you're looking at the system, a history of redlining and those structural systems, and especially in this Cleveland or Cuyahoga County, there's a great history that has been there for decades, even before some of us were born, that are now being implemented. I grew up on 95th and Cedar, and before the juvenile center and all those systems became where they are from or where they are now, I remember that neighborhood before then. I understand about the neighborhoods that have food deserts and so many lack of resources. I can remember in my history going to Harry E. Davis, a school that we didn't have heat every day. But if we don't understand the history of those pieces, how can we ever get to a place to start healing from the things in which we're dealing with now? And so many of these social and structural issues that so many people of color and these communities of colors are dealing with, they just didn't just happen yesterday. They didn't just happen today. These are systems and part of structures that have been there for decades and decades that our parents and grandparents had to deal with, or with a lack of understanding, did not deal with. And now we have the systems that we have here currently. And it's not to place blame, because the lack of knowledge is the lack of knowledge. If we look through the history books and understand the history books, sometimes don't have the full story or the full breadth of knowledge for us to understand what is going on currently in front of our face. So history, it's there to be shared and not to be kept. And so
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that's what's so important about this conversation. One of the things that come up for me in hearing your response, Daniel, is this conversation about critical race theory in our schools, right? Which, that's not happening. It's not in the K-12 system. It's a legal framework, but people are using that as ammunition to silence folks and silence the institutions of education from being able to expose kids to the realities of history and to talk about anything that causes discomfort, right? It's a way of sort of creating this space where particularly white folks don't have to be uncomfortable about talking about race, right? It's silencing history, right? And so exactly what you're saying is happening. We're literally in the midst of a fight for that, right? Of a fight for the ability to actually share and talk about what it is that has happened in our country more holistically from multiple perspectives, and not just from the perspectives of one particular group, right? And so I think you're spot on, Daniel. And that actually brings up something else. Jennifer, I haven't forgotten about you, but I actually want to come back to you, David, because something else that I know you all are working on in Cleveland connects to what Daniel just said. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about the Garden of 11 Angels and what's that project and how is that connected to what Daniel was saying in terms of going back and remembering what has happened. And I'm gonna loop you in, Jennifer, in just a second.
Yes, and so the Garden of 11 Angels was a memorial that was just dedicated this past fall in November of 2021 to the victims, the 11 victims whose bodies were found in the east side of Cleveland on Imperial Avenue and East 123rd Street. And this happened 12 years ago. So when we talk about the effects of violence, it's not just the physical act, but it literally seeps into the landscape itself, and serves as a reminder, really, either a good reminder or a bad reminder that either can offer healing or re-traumatize if that landscape is either left untouched, if that history is erased, if nothing is done to either memorialize or even have the conversation to bring that healing and closure. So that was a project that was very near and dear to us as an association, because one of the co-founders, Jacqueline Gillen, who I mentioned in the beginning, who passed away last August, was one of the biggest and probably most vocal advocates for that project when no one else was advocating for it. It became a political issue, then it became a land issue, and really at the core was what are we doing to memorialize a place, something that has happened, something that has been such a sore spot for the families, for the community at large. What are we doing to honor this, and what are we doing to learn from it and move on from it? And so through Jackie's leadership and her role at the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, they were able to obtain the parcels which these tragedies occurred. And we're able to bring a design to it that created a park that not only memorializes the women, but could be used for the community for various purposes. In a community that has a deficit in such usable green space. So it's about honoring the past, and in doing so, it's honoring the people that are here now, that live in these landscapes. So that is very much a part of, who we as Black environmental leaders, we are trying to do, is to bring an awareness to these stories, that they are intrinsically linked to the landscape, and that reverberate through time, in that by coming together in forms like this can bring a sense of healing and closure to these issues.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, David. Jennifer, I want to actually bring you in, because part of that Garden of 11 Angels is an attempt to start to create some healing, right? I remember, living in Cincinnati. I think I was actually living in Columbus at the time. And I remember seeing on the news the discovery of those women's bodies, right? And the first thing I said to myself was, if 11 white women had gone missing, there was no way it would have taken this long.
Mm-hmm.
There was an initial gut reaction that there's something racialized about this, right? Regardless of the race of the perpetrator in this situation, the fact that this thing went on this way is it was poor women, right? It was the discarded in our communities, right? Who were victimized in this space. And I love that this is an attempt to memorialize that. And I would love to hear, Jennifer, from your perspective. I know you do a lot of work around healing and connecting to nature. I would love to just hear from you how we can start to use the environment. What are some other ways we can start to use the environment to cultivate deeper healing and restoration? What has that looked like for you and your work?
Yeah, so I really want to just start with acknowledging that for me, it's been about understanding and learning adaptive practices and solidarity, right? So for me, forest bathing has been a practice. It's also called Shinrin Yoku. The language specifically comes from Japan, and it developed during the urbanization of Japan in '82. And it actually is a practice that I think a lot of us might do in some regards, but for me, it came through a process of trying to grow through grief. I had done a lot of recreational experiences in nature, hiking, snowshoeing, skiing, fishing, but I really wanted to have a more immersive and reflective and connected experience with nature. And forest bathing is a very intimate practice that allows you to take healing anywhere you are in the more than human world. And so it's really allowed me to engage in a space of mindfulness, but also healing. Many practitioners in the medical space prescribe park prescriptions and garden therapy for folks experiencing hypertension, depression. And this is essentially a practice that I have really cultivated so that I can deal with challenges for myself physically, but also sharing those practices. And one of the ways I've been able to do that is through really adapting an acknowledgement during my forest guidance to others, where I really acknowledge my ancestral path that brought me to the place where I am, and also acknowledging the ways in which we've become extractive when it comes to nature. We look at resources as something to take, or places that we go in green spaces as something to do, but we have to have a place and a space within that to be still and allow ourselves to understand the interconnectedness in our relationship and decenter humanness, and really have a more full understanding of that relationship and how we are stewards to nature and how nature is stewards to us. And so that is the type of practice that you would take to this garden, right? That you would take to various spaces where we've experienced trauma and need healing. So for me, it's really about understanding the how of healing and how we really adapt these practices in these spaces, and not think of it as programming or an escape, but as an invitation to really experience ourselves wholly within nature and understand nature within us. And one example I have of that is I live around the cultural gardens, and I oftentimes would just like take walks and just, kind of just do walking for exercise. But when I did actually integrate this practice for myself, I began to notice very specific things around me, like the Liquidambar styrosiflua tree, which is actually a sweet gum tree. And it was kind of crunching under my feet, and I was feeling, and I'm like, okay, I've seen these before, but I felt them. I was more aware of them. And it really, really kind of like was a catalyst for me to learn about them. And I now use them as mulch in my garden. And I'm not feeding into a capitalist system of buying mulch, but I'm more aware of my surroundings and my community and the natural wholeness and my connectedness, and how I can be a steward by whether it's like tending and cleaning up, but also being able to clean up and remove something but bring it back to its natural state where it belongs. And so there's this like reciprocity that comes from that awareness and that stillness that I just didn't get when I was taking hikes, right? So I really think that the practice and the understanding of how is a part of that healing process.
I love that. I love that reciprocity, that interconnectedness. There's my husband's a preacher and a pastor, so there's a part of me that's like, there's a sermon in that, right? There's a sermon in that.
Absolutely. Yes.
But because there's something from that, right? There's so much we can learn from nature about how we can be with each other and with ourselves. What does it look like to be connected fully within ourselves? What does that feel like to live in that way? What does it look and feel like to truly see and know that we are connected to one another, right? Which is one of the lies of white supremacy, is that we are individuals who are not connected to one another. And if COVID taught us nothing else, it taught us that what's happening to my neighbor next door gonna affect me whether or not I think it does, right? That's literal next door, that's country next door, that's, all the next door neighbors, right? And that's the reality, that's the truth. And I hear that in what you're saying, Jennifer, that you have felt experience of that interconnectedness, and you're allowing that to wash over you and to change you in your relationship to nature. That's beautiful. We need to go forest bathing together.
I actually have a program where all Black environmental leaders are invited to attend. It's called Growth and Joy and Healing Through Grief. And it's 10% off for all Bell members. So you are welcome to join me. I'm inviting everyone.
Yes. And for our viewers, I know we're going to be sending out a link with an invitation to that and other programs that Jennifer has going on. So please keep watching and look at your chat and comments. And also, if you have questions for our panelists, please send in your questions. We would love to engage you in the conversation as well. So with that, as I'm thinking about this conversation, Daniel, you've been at the national parks for 15 years. So I actually have a two-part question for you. The first is, what have you noticed as it relates to the trends of how Black folks are engaging in the park that you've been at or not? What are your observations there? What seems to be the trends there?
Yeah, so I've been at the Park Service for over 15 years now. Majority of them at Cuyahoga Valley National Park. We haven't really had a big trend, just being honest. And it's no fault to the national park or the communities around it, but in this greater Cleveland area, we have so many metro parks that so many people of color commute in. You have Euclid Creeks and now the Euclid and so many other places, but the national park doesn't have a big presence in Cuyahoga County. Our demographics for visitation for the past 20 years has been 95% white America. Our demographics, when we talk about our employment, it's been 95 to almost 98% white as well. What we're trying to do right now, we're in an identity crisis, and what I've been saying is that we are trying to step into this world and understand that we do not represent the faces and the places of America. We have National Park Service sites across this country. We have over 460 national parks and historic sites across the United States of America and our greater territories, but we don't have a great presence in all of our spaces. So one of the things that we're trying to do, there's campaigns out, Find Your Park. One of the big pushes that I've been doing is trying to find your people, is to connect the National Park Service, primarily Cuyahoga Valley and even James A. Garfield in Mentor, Ohio, to connect them to the inner cities, to making sure that we build the relationship with these communities that we say in the Park Service we want to have a presence in. When you go to a national park and you may see a person with green and gray on with a top hat on, you may not see a person of color. But that doesn't mean that people of color does not or don't go to national park sites. But what that does is it shows our audience, it shows our visitation that people like them are not represented. When we look at our advertisements and those type of things, the individuals that we want to see, meaning people from the neighborhoods that I may come from or you all come from, may not be represented in these spaces by the imagery that we're showing. So we are in a crisis. So we're trying to change that and build these relationships with these community partners so that it's not a one-off experience, but it's an experience for a lifetime.
Can I say, I think like my experience has been, I'll see the images and ads, but when I get to the parks, I don't see the same congruency or like parallels within the park. So for me, it's like matching that. It's not just showing images or saying we want this or want that, but it's the systems change. So I think, you know, that's part of the process is articulating that and like trying to find a way for that to actually match up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Definitely.
Yeah.
The imagery is a big thing. You know, it's a big thing regardless of where you're going. And I know, like Robin, you made a statement earlier, you know, we're all in the fight right now. In the process of me going through the job of 15 years and being primarily the only Black person in the room, I had to change my mind frame of saying, I've been fighting people. I've been fighting people for 15 years, and I had to change my thought process to say that I'm trying to change the culture. Because when you fight, somebody loses.
Mm-hmm.
And the words that we say out our mouth, we have so much power of life and death out of things that we say. And for 15 almost years, I was trying to destroy a system or people within the system, not understanding that they are bigger than the system and I am bigger than the system that I'm a part of. So I have to change the culture within the construct of which I work in. So I had to change my verbiage to say, I'm trying to change a culture, and it starts with each individual looking in the mirror and changing their own minds.
Amen. Absolutely. That's real, right? It's about being to your point, right? It's the fight against posture is exhausting, right? When you're pushing against something, it's depleting. It depletes you. And what I hear you saying is an invitation to instead get clear about being a stand for building something better, right? And that includes to the point of how we're all connected. We're all connected. That includes the people who we don't always like, the people who sometimes are embodying structural racism in a way that causes us harm. It's about figuring out what does it look like to be clear about our stance and be in relationship in a way that allows us to move forward. And what does reconciliation look like along that journey, right? And so I love this conversation. I love you just dropped some like entire nuggets of wisdom, and it just washed over all of Ohio, not just Cleveland. And so thank you for sharing that and for inviting us to be cognizant. What are the words that we're using? What is the posture that we're showing up with? And how do we make sure we remember that the people are not our enemy? Like, that's spot on. So thank you so much for that. And to that end, you know, I'm thinking about what you're saying, Jennifer. I'm thinking about this idea of and the importance, not just the idea, but the practical need to really and investigate what our relationship is to the environment, right? And so I'm curious for any of you to answer, as you think about a place like Cuyahoga Valley National Park, or you think about the Garden of 11 Angels, or you think about, you know, any of the local parks in your communities, how might we start to change Black folks' relationship to nature and to those environments? What have you learned in your work, or what's some encouragement that you might offer for folks?
I can say that after traveling to a lot of national parks and local parks, I've seen plaques erected for different folks and for different purposes and acknowledgments. But I would love to see some more of that happening that really acknowledges the vanguards of our movements and all of our around the city. I think people have to understand that these things didn't just happen, right? I think that there has to be something that's tactile. And not only that, but there's a level of inheritance that we all really bring into the work, right? And then acknowledging that, right? And making a space, just like we do land acknowledgements for Indigenous folks. We have to start having some ritual or some practice that allows us to acknowledge our ancestry, our mentors, the vanguards that we've been coming to know and love, just like how David acknowledged Jackie whenever he introduces leadership. That's a practice, that's a ritual, that's something that can be inherited, right? So I think really acknowledging and understanding that we are in a new space with how we bring ourselves into environmental work, and we are capable of bringing new practices to the space, and that we can do that now. We don't have to ask permission, is what I'm saying, and we own that. So we've inherited that level of ownership, and I think acknowledging that and understanding that and bringing it into fruition constantly is what we have to keep doing.
Yeah, I'll add on to that as well, Jennifer. I think one thing that we have to realize as a culture and a society is that people of color has always been in these spaces. Our stories have been told throughout history in the creation of the United States. If we go back to the history piece, Black people and Indigenous people have created the systems in which we have currently, but the only difference is all of our stories are not always told. If you look around the greater Cuyahoga County area, you can see people of color on the weekends hiking, biking, fishing. You can go down to Euclid Creek and see people playing basketball. You can go to your local park and you see kids riding bicycles and things. But the one thing that I want to make sure that we all keep relevant, and even being a steward of or conduit of the National Park Service and public spaces, we have to make sure that in the spaces in which we say we want people to be in, we have to be relevant as well for those communities to be in those spaces as well. I'm an advocate for public spaces and outdoors, and just because I work and getting paid through the National Park Service, a federal agency, doesn't mean that I don't advocate for all public spaces and lands across this country. Because if we have an advocate that will go down to the Euclid Beach and have fun and recreate, we're going to have an advocate 15 years down the road to keep Cuyahoga Valley open as well, because they understand the beauty and the understanding of what this nature is. And if you take it to a step further, when we look at the national park and what it has and what it holds, people say it's the untold stories or the jewel of America. But guess what? Jewels have to be shared. Some jewels aren't destroyed, but they're transferred in different ways. And through the transformation is through the stories in which that we are now telling, and the stories that we are now disseminating across this country about the indigenous people, about the African Americans, about the Africans that came through the transatlantic slave trade that helped build and cultivate the same systems that we all grow to love, but we don't know how those things intertwine. When we click on light bulbs and so many other pieces, they're intertwined in everything that we do right now, but we have to be in a space of taking that fear mask off and being okay to have the conversations with our white counterparts, with our Black and Asian and any other counterpart, to have these conversations, understand that you aren't a racist because of your ideology or because you come from a dominant culture or because you have a privilege that someone else may not have had or you went to college, but it's a privilege to be able to share that and to grow others into the space as well, and to be okay to mess up. We all step on the shoes of so many other people and the footprints in the sand of those people that come behind us, but we have to make sure we leave room for those that's coming in front of us as well. So.
Go ahead, David.
I'd love to add to that. I'm just blown away by Daniel, you and Jennifer. For me, it really starts, nature starts at home. We learn through the environment that we are literally, that we grow into, that we are born into. where I kind of come into these discussions, and that has been a discussion that's been happening for a number of years in Cleveland around park equity, is that there is a disconnect between the environments that we experience, like right outside, and in particular, the communities in which have the most deficit in usable and functional green space. That connection has been severed. So, I know there's a lot of these outreach efforts happening, getting folks from the city to come out to Cuyahoga Valley National Park. But how are you going to make that step when you don't even have a park in your own backyard that you feel safe going to? So that's really where it starts. It starts in realizing that nature isn't a place that is in Yosemite or in one of these far away places on a postcard. It is right in our backyard, and how we connect to that is so crucially important. And I'm going to give a shout out here to just the awesome work that SIAT, the Hoods, Marcia, Ebony, Erica have been doing. Journey on Yonder, Joy, Kim Woodford Smith. And so I think back to actually last winter, where SIAT did a trip, a hike, an excursion in the winter. This was back in January, in Doan Brook, which for those who are not familiar, it is this wonderful green space that exists on the east side of Cleveland, right adjacent to the Buckeye Shaker, Wood Hill neighborhoods, that is people don't even know about because it has been disconnected by a roadway. But when you get into it, it's this incredible immersive experience. And I think of that, forest bathing experience, like literally the sound of the roadway it goes away, it disappears, it melts away. So in getting back to what Daniel said before, some of these decisions that were made generations ago, and I'm thinking of redlining, I'm thinking of, the urban, quote unquote, urban renewal and the highway projects of the 60s and the 70s, which really physically disconnected neighborhoods from their natural amenities. I think of I-90 severing, communities from Lake Erie, which is one of just an incredible natural asset to Cleveland and to the entire region here. These are some of the ways that we need to acknowledge what history has done, and then make those steps into, we have these wonderful amenities that are right in our backyard. If we could connect to those, then we could make that larger, step into a Cuyahoga Valley National Park that really kind of, that could make that connection for a future generation.
I love this conversation, just to kind of elevate for our listeners what some of the themes that I'm hearing in this conversation. It's part of it seems like there's sort of two folds here in this conversation. It's the need to honor the importance of remembering and sort of reclaiming those spaces where violence has happened, right? So the Garden of 11 Angels, I think about Tamir Rice, right? And that tragedy, which still is top of our hearts and our minds, and how we remember what happened in that space and how that changes our relationship to that space, right? And then I think about the other part of this conversation is, so yeah, there's that, right? There's the way that trauma is connected with space and the need to sort of memorialize and reclaim that we can create healing in those spaces. And also, we can also go beyond that and go to all of nature, everything from what's in our backyards to what's in the national parks, and to change our relationship there so that those spaces can be healing spaces, can be restorative spaces. And from that, the last sort of nugget I hear in this conversation, again, just kind of recapping in case a few folks came in late, is this importance of telling the story, right? One of my mentors often says, there's stars all in the sky, and each star is a set of events that have happened in our lives. And we take a few events and we weave together a constellation, and that becomes the story of our history and the story of who we are, right? But there's more stars than the ones that we've grabbed. What does it look like for us to go back and grab new stars, right? And that's what I hear and what you're saying, Jennifer, David, and Daniel, is the need to reclaim stories and to say, yeah, here are some narratives that we have had in our community and in our country about our community as it relates to place, space, nature, etc. And there's this whole other story. There's all these dope people in our ancestries, and there's all these wonderful things. And this over here, we built that, and this over here wouldn't have happened without us. And to remind ourselves and our kids, right, of the richness and just the multitude of history connected to space. I'm loving this conversation. Jennifer, you look like you got something to say. Come on, girl.
I just remembered the first time I think I saw Daniel was at Rhythm on the River, when I went to the park in the summer when I was working, doing voter registration work. And it was the most Black people I've ever seen at a park in Ohio. And I was like, wow. Yeah, it was so many people, and like the relationship of joy in nature, and like how we have very strict parameters of how we can experience that joy, and like how limited it is, right? Like but that one time was like amazing. And then I went to a trip in West Virginia with Saya, and again, it was the most of us that I saw in West Virginia at a park. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And we did so much, like we did so many cool things. And I'm just like, wow, what if we could just have this joy? It was healing for me, because usually I'm kind of like either with one of my friends or by myself, but it just felt so different seeing so many of us having that relationship to nature in a different context. It was just so unique. And I just feel like that has to be really like built out too, right? Like the ways that we are able to experience joy without being policed, because that can really like hurt the way we go back to nature or our perspective. So like, I just think that experience and understanding like that it exists, but it exists within the confines of a very like specific time, place, programming, and just really wanting to open up the idea of healing to joy as well, and that being a way to heal, because I feel like that's how I've experienced it collectively, and I really think that that's an important piece for us to really understand and try to like expound upon this as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's beautiful. I feel like y'all were up there kicking it. That sounds fun. Come to Cincinnati. We be doing that too down here. You can come visit the Natty, where we went to the Super Bowl. But on another note, I had to throw that in. It's been my whole lifetime since we've gone, so I just had to shout out to the Bengals. But so as we start to close out here, I want to invite you all to share just a final word of wisdom and encouragement for our viewers. What would you tell someone who's like, you know what, I've been kind of teetering on the edges of really reconnecting with nature, and I don't really know what to do or where to start, or what would be your encouragement for them of how they might get started? Because I think we all long for that. I think people are longing for deeper connection to nature, and we're not always sure where to go or how to start. So what would be your encouragement and your invitation to folks to do that?
All right, well, I guess I'll jump in there. I'm gonna steal something from Nike almost. Just do it. I know sometimes there's a lot of fear in going to public spaces. I have hiked the Grand Canyon. I have spent the night. I have hiked 13,000 feet in elevation in Denver, Colorado. And I've done these all by myself. There is fear. And I tell you, it's a quote from a Will Smith movie, After Earth. You have to understand that danger is real. But the only thing that we fear is understanding that we don't know what's going to happen next. But when we take that lens off of not knowing and being okay with not knowing, and to try things, we may find out we may like it. So be courageous and understand that all spaces and places may not be quote unquote safe for all people at this time in these days in life. You have to understand that the danger can be out there, but be adventurous and try things, but always try to get to the yes and try to get to the point where you can too see yourself in these spaces.
I'll go next. I think because the audience and we're all like environmental oriented people, I've really worked at trying to invite my friends who aren't really into being in the outdoors to events and programming. So a lot of my friends from college, we used to go to the club, we used to kick it. Now we go bike riding, we go swimming, we go on trips, and we go like diving, and we do all these things. And so we've kind of recalibrated our time together into not just like nightlife, but we do stuff during the day. So I've really tried to orient my friends into things like forest bathing, and they're some of the first people that I practice with. And I think we have to also be a little more assertive at saying, hey friends, like there's this we could do a brunch in the park on the weekend, or we could just trying to take a lot of those experiences with folks I know are kind of intimidated in the outdoors, and invite them to stuff and doing things different. And also SIAT, other groups, Black People Camp, there's so many other groups popping up. There's a lot of social media groups popping up where you can see people like you doing things and giving you tips on where to go, where not to go. But there's a lot of resources that are popping up. So I would just say, like, be assertive and try to adapt some of the ways that you experience time with people and take it to the outdoors when you can.
Yeah, piggybacking off of what Jennifer said, like some of my favorite memories of being outside have been with people. So I think it's in our DNA to really, experience the outdoors. It's a very personal experience, because it reminds you that there is something bigger than you, but also to be able to feel that interconnectedness through nature, which is all around us, and through our own shared humanity, I think is just so important. So yes, bring a buddy. And to Daniel's point, it's like find your place and go and boldly go. It's just so important and it doesn't have to be, like I said, it doesn't have to be Acadia National Park. It could just be a place that you could walk to, that that sweet gum tree that's right around the corner. Pick up those little spiky balls and play around with them. Have some fun and connect on that very kind of in the ground, get your hands dirty kind of level. And that's where not only the learning happens, but also feeling that connection to the earth. It's just, I think it's just so important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Hearing y'all, it's just really, really inspiring, right? It's, I hike, I kayak, I do those things. I don't camp though. I can't sleep outside. That's why I gotta get a cabin or something. I kind of draw the line right there, but which is a great example of how you need to do it, right? Like if you gonna draw the line at sleeping outside, that's okay. You can go back home at the end of the night, but do it how you need to do it. But it has been so healing and restorative, right? It has been the single most restorative thing I have ever done is to practice mindfulness in nature. And so I had never heard of it as forest bathing. I just kind of was like, I'm going and I'm gonna do this thing. I ain't had no name for it, but it has been the single most healing thing that I've done. And so I love this conversation. Just get out there and do it. And to that end, there's one of our viewers actually is inviting other viewers to join her. Nicole Jackson has an initiative. Black in National Parks Week is coming up in August. And she just wanted to promote that event and let folks know, look into it, Google it, do some research and show up in the national parks August 22nd through the 27th. It's if you're someone and you're like, okay, what's that first step? That's a great first step. It's going to be some Black folks there. So if you're a little awkward, you can show up and be with your people in nature. And so it's a great opportunity to get started in the conversation in this experience.
And I'll also mention, thank you, Nicole, so much for giving the shout out to that just awesome week. Sorry, Nicole, but I'm putting you on the spot, but she is a birder. There is a Black birding community out there that, it's there connect to?
I'm in
to-
that. I'm in that community.
Okay, Jennifer,
Of course
there you
you
go.
are,
I
Jennifer.
love birding. I love it.
I don't have the information for that, but Jennifer, if you could provide that, and we could hopefully, and Nicole as well, you know, hook up the Blackbirders out there. There is a
Yeah.
network, and it is just, yeah, it is growing.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I know in the chat, the link to the Black National Park Week is in the chat, and we'll make sure we post out as well on the Black Environmental Leaders Association Facebook page and things like that, information for the birding community. I think that is wonderful and brilliant, and amazing. And I just want to say thank you all. Like, you all just dropped nuggets, and you know, if it didn't snow so much in Northeast Ohio, y'all might have convinced me it might be worth moving up there. But I am just so, I have an affinity up there because I went to Kent State. So it's all fun and love. It's all love, y'all. But I am so excited to just have been in this space with y'all and to learn from you all, to hear your wisdom and your passion. And I am so just grateful for how you all showed up this evening, really inspiring us and challenging us as well to lean into being our best selves and to reclaiming space and place as a healing ground and a playing ground, right? And not something to be feared, not just something that's held as traumatic or scary, but something that we ourselves can reclaim in a way that our ancestors have before us. And so thank you all so much for being in this conversation. And I just want to say to all of our viewers, this is just the start. This is one of 6. We're gonna be doing this every month. Next month, we're gonna be going to Sandusky. And even if you don't live there, still show up and hear the conversation. We really want to just continue to expand this conversation to help everyone to see the ways that are built in natural environment matters to us and our wellness, our wholeness. It's a part of our history and it's a part of our future. And we can claim that space as our own. We can cultivate our own healing and restoration through nature, and we can use that as a building block to the larger racial justice work in the community that connects to that. And so I invite you to join us every third Thursday of the month. We're going to be going live stream. Follow the Black Environmental Leaders Association's Facebook page and YouTube channel. And just thank you all so much. And thank you, Samia and David, for your leadership for Bell. Thank you, Jennifer and Daniel, for your wisdom. Thank you to Common Strategies for just your brilliant coordination, bringing this together. And I can't wait to see everyone next month. Good evening, everyone.